hello everyone. Welcome to another Women Techmakers SSA Spotlight webinar. We took a short break and we're so excited to be back. My name is Onajite Emera Ogwo and I'm the SSA lead for Women Techmakers at Google. For those of you that don't know, Women Techmakers is a global initiative that provides visibility, community, and resources to enable women in technology to thrive. And our Women Techmakers SSA Spotlight series was created to amplify the stories and pathways of women in technology across SSA. So this series hopes to connect women with economic opportunities in tech by demonstrating specific ways that women can jumpstart and develop in their technology careers. Today, our spotlight is on Pamela Hill, who's an Android engineer and the tech lead at a cryptocurrency startup called Luno. She's also the lead GDG organizer and Women Techmakers ambassador for Johannesburg. Hi, Pamela.
Hello.
It's awesome to have you here. So you'll be sharing some useful best practices with us on how to make our Android apps more accessible for everyone, and also sharing some of your journey of building a successful career as a woman in tech. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So sorry, I stepped in when you were speaking.
Can I get started or?
Yes, of course. The spotlight is now on you, so please get started.
Cool, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'd like to just start by sharing my screen. So please let me know if you can't see it. Right. Okay. Great. You should be seeing very beautiful blue and green screen with Android for everyone and no speaker notes. So really good afternoon from a very sunny, very hot South Africa. My talk today is about accessibility on Android, or how to make apps for everyone. So my name is Pamela Hill. I'm an Android engineer and tech lead at Luno, and you can find me where I blog at pamelahill.com, or you can find me on Twitter. I'm there way too much. My handle is Pamela A. Hill. So let's have a look at the topics that I'll be covering today. I'll start with a discussion on what accessibility is and why it's really, really important. And I'll make a case for making Android apps more accessible. I'll explain the different kinds of disabilities that there are and how Android actually provides tools that assist these folks. I'll explain more about how to make our Android apps accessible in the design phase, and I'll also explain the Android accessibility services and how you can kind of make sure your app is optimized so that you can give a great user experience to your app, to your users that are both abled and disabled using these services. And finally, I'll end off with some cool tools that will help you test and verify the accessibility of your app. Let's get started. So first, what is accessibility? Well, you might have heard that term before and understood it as enabling folks with permanent disabilities to access technology. But accessibility actually has a much broader scope. According to Wikipedia, the source of all truth, right? Accessibility is the design of products, devices, services, and environments that work to include everyone. But everyone also includes folks with temporal or situational impairments, such as a broken arm or when you're carrying something heavy. Age-related conditions also fall within the scope of accessibility. But how important is accessibility really? Well, according to the World Health Organization, 15% of the world's population lives with some form of disability. That's more than 1 billion people. So they also say that the estimate is growing due to population aging and the rapid spread of chronic diseases. So I'd say accessibility is really, really important. So considering this, why are we still making apps that aren't accessible? What do we really think when we think about accessibility? I think it's partly ignorance and partly fear, and sometimes it's just nasty procrastination. I think sometimes we feel that we don't know enough about disabilities to be able to make our apps accessible. Perhaps we think that we can cram more and more features into our apps for the majority of our users, and maybe that's good enough. Or perhaps we think that we can make our apps accessible later. So actually, the hardest part of accessibility is the willingness to do it. Maybe I've convinced you that it's important, but how do you convince a product owner or your CEO or your MD that it is important and worth investing money and time in? Firstly, it's kind of the right thing to do. Nobody likes being excluded, and that's not just at school. When we are not making our apps accessible, we are excluding disabled folks from using our apps. Accessibility also benefits everyone, not just disabled folks. Accessible design is simplified and clear and to the point. That sounds good. Accessibility can also be a big business opportunity. We've seen that disabled folks, there's more than 1 billion disabled folks in the world. It's a very large section of the world's population. But not a lot of apps are actually designed with these folks in mind. And lastly, accessibility can actually be a key differentiator for your app in a very competitive app marketplace. So the accessibility project classifies disabilities into 4 categories: visual, auditory, motor, and cognitive. But some other sources have also included neurological and speech. But I would also kind of think that mental illness is also part of those categories of disabilities. Let's have a look at all the tools that Android provides to assist these folks, just a few of them at least. So first we have TalkBack. TalkBack is a screen reader, and screen readers are tools that are used by folks with visual disabilities, such as blindness, that gives spoken feedback to what's happening on their screens without these folks having to look at their screens. To navigate to the next or the previous views, you simply swipe right or left. And to interact with the interface, you use gestures such as double tapping on the screen. Brailleback is another tool used by folks with visual disabilities, again, like blindness, that works with a refreshable Braille display and TalkBack. Content appears on this display in Braille so that these folks can read with their fingertips. It's actually very, very impressive. And they can interact with their devices, the Android devices, using keys on this display. Switch is another interesting device. It's used by folks with fine motor function disabilities. And Switch Access integrates your Android device with the Switch. A Switch has 2 buttons, one to move to the next view and another to select. Android provides many more tools, such as for color blindness and so on, for folks with impairments and disabilities. But the tools that I've mentioned are going to be the most helpful for our discussion today. So let's have a look at how we can make our apps more accessible by looking at design. Accessibility starts with design. A designer with a great passion for accessibility can really create a solid foundation for an app with an exceptional user experience for both abled and disabled folks. Phil Weaver, the Android accessibility team lead at Google, gave 3 rules for creating accessible designs. While it's not exhaustive, it's a great place to start and something to keep in mind when you design your apps. First, he said, make information visible. Prefer simple, big controls, and label images precisely and concisely. Designing for accessibility requires the designer thinks very carefully about aspects in design such as copy, typography, color, and imagery. In my mind, design is kind of like a very delicate balance between form and function, between the need to be very creative and unique and according to your brand, and to be understandable, usable by everyone. So let's have a look at each one of these design aspects in turn. First, let's look at copy. Copy should be localized, concise, and descriptive. So localized copy is going to assist folks with a very limited English vocabulary to understand the app in their native language. I know my first language isn't English, and I can imagine that it might be very, very difficult to understand assistive text when it's not even your own language. Screen readers actually go through, kind of laboriously read through all the assistive text that there is. So it's really important that your assistive text, also called content descriptions on Android, is very concise and yet very descriptive. Many screen readers actually will go ahead and announce controls and their states. So it's not really needed to include that in the content description of your controls. They use words or sounds, for example. And when you decide on some copy for a particular control, prefer verbs over nouns. What the control does over what the control literally means. For example, if you have a floating action button with a plus sign in, that would typically kind of mean add something, or is you're adding something, or it's maybe new, which is preferable over calling it plus or plus sign. Next up, typography. So the purpose of typography is not just to look pretty, it's so to provide you with content. So the text needs to be super, super readable. Android Studio actually provides a lint warning, or just a warning, for text sizes smaller than 12 SP or scale independent pixels. And that's a really great rule of thumb for minimum text sizes. But it's really important to also note that on your Android device, you can increase the font scale from values like small, normal, large, and huge. And that's going to vary the font scale between 0.8 to 1.3, the standard scale. So it's really important to test your layouts in the variety of these settings to make sure that they actually the text doesn't fall off the side of the screen, that the text doesn't overlap. It's also really important to, I know designers often very much love their light fonts, but it's important to actually prefer heavy fonts over light fonts. And when it comes to alignment, please don't use justified or centered. Now, this is the reason for it. Centered text is going to increase the cognitive load because each line starts in a different position. Justified text, on the other hand, has a different space between each word so that they can all kind of line up on the sides together. And this increases the cognitive load and makes it very difficult to read and understand for folks with cognitive disabilities. So I once watched a video by digital designer Tatiana Mack that gave a suggestion that you can do instead is by creating a centered container with left-aligned text instead. Now, when it comes to capitalization, I realize that it's very often used for a call to action control. But note that once again, all caps is very difficult for folks with cognitive disabilities to read and understand. It increases that cognitive load. Also, make sure that when you actually implement your caps, that you use the attribute called text all caps and not just type out in your string type out the string with all caps, because interestingly enough, something like Talkback is going to read that text as an abbreviation, which is going to be very difficult to understand and very confusing and frustrating for disabled users. So color is one of the most amazing design elements that there are, but it's really important to consider accessibility when selecting your color palette. So firstly, there's a concept called contrast ratio, and that is the difference between any two colors. It is how different the one color appears from the other. And in order to make text visible and readable, you need a good contrast ratio between the text and the background. So small text should have color ratio of at least 4.5 to 1, and larger text should have a contrast ratio of 3 to 1 with its background. There's actually a tool that you can look up. It's called the Material Design Color Tool, and it's going to help you select colors for the background for your palette that will either work really great. It will show you exactly, will a white text or a black text look, will it be legible or illegible on your background. It's very handy. In terms of visual cues, make sure that you don't rely solely on the color to provide visual cues. There are people that are affected by color blindness, for example, and they have difficulty perceiving the differences between colors. So make sure that when you, for example, use the color red to indicate that a form field has an error in, that you add something to it, like an icon with maybe a warning sign or a assistive text, or not assistive text, but or error message, so that these folks can also understand what is going on and why can't I submit my form. And also, please don't rely very heavily on motion as a design element, since there are folks that have motion sickness, and there's actually tools on the operating systems that allow you to put off motion or reduce motion on your on apps. So your app might not work properly if you rely on motion too much. When it comes to imagery, most designers and developers know that they should provide alternative text for imagery, but often this is omitted and neglected. Once again, this text should be localized, concise, and descriptive. Provide a content description as microcopy to the developer, so that the text is well thought out and very clear. Not a rush job by a developer. We're not really good at creating copy sometimes. So designing for mental illness is completely unexplored territory. And I've thought about it, and I've heard some tips and tricks that might be effective. Firstly, for those affected with anxiety, they need clear instructions and more information and assistance should they require some reassurance. I remember once I had a problem with a booking website, like a hotel booking website, and it was just a disaster. I was so anxious afterwards, I could not even function properly. Then for folks with impulse control problems, such as folks with bipolar disorder in a manic state, they would benefit from cues such as stop, consider, and then act, so that when they perform an action that is not very easily reversible or cancelable, they kind of have more of a slow down process. And for example, online shopping. Let's have a look at how to code for accessibility. So tools like Switch can be used with our apps, but we as a user, you need to be able to view the app, and you also need to interact with the app. But does that mean that we have to write special integrations for each one of these accessibility services with our apps? And the answer is no. The Android framework actually does the heavy lifting for us, providing the necessary integrations with the service. Mostly all our apps has to do is a few tweaks here and there to make sure that we have a proper experience with our apps. It's pretty cool. So the one thing that most people know about accessibility is that they should provide alternative text called content description in Android whenever they have an image. So this code snippet shows how I'd label an image of a star using the content description attribute. In this case, Android or TalkBack would read the image view as twinkly star. But it's actually not really, it's not actually necessary to label every image. Some images are decorative. You don't need to. In that case, we can set the content description to @null so that we can get rid of the Android Studio warning. But even more explicitly, we can set the important for accessibility to no. I like this a bit better because it's more explicit about our intentions. We are very explicit that this is not important for accessibility. I created an app called Spark Cats for the rest of the examples. It's basically like a dating app for cats. The first screen I want to show you is just the profile screen for the individual cats. So notice at the top we have the name label and then the cat's name, Eliza, followed by that very beautiful and cute cat. So this is how we would normally implement it. Of course, I would externalize the strings, but this is just an example. We have two text views, one with the name label and the other one with the cat's name, Eliza. But the problem is, it's not exactly accessible. TalkBack would read the name and then require you to swipe to hear Eliza. So how do we fix this so that it's read together? The one option is to group the two text views into a new parent layout and to set two properties on it, focusable to true and focusable in touch mode to false. The first attribute basically will allow the cat's the name label and the cat's name to be read together when we're using TalkBack. And the second will make sure that when it's for a non-accessibility user, we can't actually focus on that control. Another option that's quite nice for some use cases is to use labels. You don't need an extra parent layout, and that's pretty cool. So instead, we use the attribute label for, and we point it to the cat's name. Our next screen is the main screen, where the existing favorite cats are displayed. There's also a floating action button there at the bottom, that green with a plus, and that allows us to add new favorite cats. So this is normally how we would implement it. We would have a layout with all the favorite cat images in, and also a floating action button or fab at the bottom. But when TalkBack reads the screen, it's going to read laboriously through all the cat descriptions and eventually get to the new favorite button. What if we want to read the new favorite button first? Maybe our user experience will be much better if we could constantly be adding instead of just remembering our favorites. So the first thing that we can do is we can use an attribute called accessibility traversal before on the fab and set it to what it must come before. In this case, that constraint layout with all the existing favorite cats. And this layout is going to, so what it will do is it will first read new favorite, double tap to activate, and then when the user actually swipes right, I've got which side is right, it will read the existing favorites descriptions. But what if something is added on the screen? How are we going to notify talkback users that something has changed? Well, we can use the announce for accessibility function. And in this code example, when the fab or flattering action button is clicked, we're going to add a random new favorite cat. Remember, this is just in a toy app, so it doesn't really matter. And then it would say added new favorite. You can also use toasts, but remember that will show for both, it will be announced for both for accessibility users and it is displayed for non-accessibility users. Something to keep in mind. My last coding tip for today is really about changing the default double tap to activate announcement on controls. So if I wanted to say new favorite button, double tap to add new spark cat, I would use this extremely overcomplicated piece of code to replace the default description with my new description. I really think that this is a great candidate for a KTX library for Android accessibility. And I've seen some code and proposals for it, but still nothing. Accessibility on Android is a really complicated matter, but these tips that I've given you now is going to get you really, really far. Something that I haven't spoke about is making your custom views accessible, but that's pretty much a whole talk on its own. Let's have a look at our last section, which is accessibility testing. I'd like to encourage you to try accessibility testing yourself. So you can find the accessibility services in settings, and then you can enable talkback. Remember, you can swipe to the right to move to the next view and to the left to go to the previous view. You can also then double tap to select and activate a control or interact with it. And it's really cool to see how fast you can navigate your favorite apps and what the pitfalls are. You can really learn a lot from that. So I tried the Uber Eats app with talkback, and I hope you can see the details of that screen, but it's not really easy to find my regular restaurant. I had to swipe through a lot of stuff in order to get to my favorite kawaii. It's also pretty easy to get to my favorite thing to order once I'm in that restaurant. And it's also pretty easy to add an item to the cart, but it's not really discoverable because you actually have to swipe back. It's easy to make a payment, but once again, it's not discoverable because you have to swipe back. So another thing that I noticed was that there was a specials carousel. You can see that in the selection doesn't have to be overwhelming section over there. It's a carousel that moves automatically through various specials, and it made the app nearly unusable because it was announcing each page as it was flipping, and you couldn't hear what you were actually swiping. Some text was actually read literally. So for example, when you have a look at the star rating of a particular store, it was read 4.5 star, 139 dot. 139 what? Then there was also a pop-up dialog in the beginning. If you've now ordered something, you've closed the app, you come back to the app, and it would ask you this, are you enjoying Uber Eats, yes or no? But it wasn't announced. So you were kind of stuck on this view, but you didn't know why. There's a tool called Accessibility Scanner. It's an app that allows you to scan the screen, any screen for any app, and it gives you suggestions on how to improve your accessibility, such as content labels, touch target sizes, and text and image contrast. So I had a look at Accessibility Scanner on Uber Eats, And some of the things that it found was that the drop-down sizes are too small. You can see there's a pickup, sort, and top eats. Just too small. So the general rule of thumb is 48 DPs or device independent pixels per control, so that you have a nice large area to be able to tap. Various buttons were also too small, such as that Now button, and there was insufficient contrast on the View Cart button labels. So I'm guessing maybe you thought that dark green and white would be readable. No. That's why it's really important to use that material design color tool to help you make sure that your color palette is legible. You can also use the Play pre-launch report. Every app that is published on Play actually has this report already. Once you upload it, it's going to be processing, and it's going to do some automated testing and taking screenshots to analyze for accessibility before app launch. So it's a really good idea to, before you actually launch your app or before you actually start rolling out your app, to have a look at your pre-launch report. It shows you issues like touch target sizes, content labels that are missing, low contrast between text and background, and other stuff. The real purpose of my talk today wasn't just to give you knowledge, but rather to get you to become an accessibility ally with me. I hope that you've become excited about the possibility of affecting real positive social change by advocating for making your app accessible. If you'd like to learn more about accessibility, especially on Android, I've written an article with all my research resources on my blog, Pamela Hill. And with that, as we come to a close, I'd like to say thank you. My blog is PamelaAhill.com, and you're always welcome to tweet at me at Pamela Hill. Thank you.
Hi, Pamela. Thank you so much. That was really, really awesome.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that knowledge with us. But quickly, before we go into Q&A on the subject, I know we have a number of people that are watching that might have some questions, but I just wanted us to circle back on sharing a little bit more about your journey. So could you tell us what inspired you to start a career in technology in the first place?
So it's not a particular, I guess, inspired journey. It was I'm actually a second generation developer. My dad was also a developer, and so I learned coding from a very young age. I learned BASIC, and then in high school I learned Pascal and Delphi. And when it came to, choosing a major for university, I was kind of stuck because I was good at languages, I was good at art, I was good at science and maths, but I didn't really have any direction. So my dad was very firm, and he's like, IT, you need to study IT. And he was right, I needed to study IT. So it's not really something that was inspiring. It was really, I just needed some guidance.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, that's a pretty good problem to have. You're good at so many things. It's just narrowing down to one. Awesome. So, I mean, it probably hasn't been, super easy, coming from school, starting your career, joining this startup and now leading, Android technology at Luno. But it probably hasn't been so easy for you to become successful in such a male-dominated industry. Do you mind sharing some of the challenges you faced, if any, as a woman in tech, and how you've overcome them?
Sure. So I think, I don't think that women, I think my problem, the challenges that I've faced were not necessarily women in tech, but women in tech related, but women related. And I think in the beginning of my career, it was very much not believing in myself, not believing that I was as good as everybody else, and not having others believe in me. So I, for example, had a woman boss. I think she was my first boss, and did not believe I could do it. Did not believe I could do it. I had these wonderful grades, better than everybody else that she hired, but she did not believe I could do it. And there was actually the Secretary of State in the US, Madeleine Albright, said there's a special place in hell for women that don't help other women. And I'm waiting for that day, lady. Yeah. So then, I struggled to get started in tech. I was forever doing documentation and small projects, and nobody would really give me a chance. So I really had a lot of disappointment in my career. And I then moved on to another job, and it was challenging in another way. It was very it was an engineering firm, so it was extremely competitive and harsh, and there was a lot of there was a lot of verbal abuse, really. So that made it even worse. And then I moved on to another company, and there was some bullying there. So there's always something. There's always something. But I'm extremely happy at Luno now. And I guess the message is that you need to be very careful about where you spend your talent, and where you spend your time. Make sure that that you are a culture fit, and that company is a culture fit to you and your values, because it can actually affect you very badly if you go to a company and you work in a company that is abusive. There's bullies, there's people that don't believe in you, and it can take a long time to actually shake that.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. But I mean, amazing that you're now somewhere where you're able to thrive.
Mm-hmm. I think it was people that believed in me and told me, try writing articles, try one. And then it was my first article was called Why Kotlin, and it was published on one of the South African IT websites, and then it was published in a physical magazine, and I was like, what is happening to me? Clearly I can do something. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And as people started seeing I could do something, they started believing in me more, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I was like, go girl.
Thank you.
Okay, so final question from me before we go to some of the more technical ones. Here at Women Techmakers, we're focused on creating a world where all women can thrive in technology. And today, because the spotlight is on you, based on your experience, what do you think is needed to make this happen?
So firstly, I think it's really important for women to support women. We do need male allies, and we do need male allies to move up and make space at the table. But it's really important for women to encourage and support and root for each other, and it's not a competition. It's not, oh, she's doing that, she was nominated for this, I should also have been nominated. Why don't go there.
Yeah.
There's a space in the sunshine for all of us. And I think it's firstly women supporting women and not bringing each other down. There's a quote that I found from Melinda Gates that said, sometimes all that's needed to lift women up is to stop pulling them down. And I believe strongly in that. We don't necessarily need to do all that much. We just need to stop pulling each other, and for our male allies to help us just not pull us down. Because I think we're exactly, we're smart enough, we're talented enough. We've got everything. We've got so much potential, but we're constantly being pulled down. And I think once we have that space where we're not being pulled down, we're going to thrive.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Thank you so much, Pamela.
Cool.
All right, so let's go to the audience. So we have a question here from Clara. And she says, for someone who knows nothing about making apps accessible, where would you recommend starting?
So I think the first thing to really understand is maybe to put yourself in the shoes of somebody that has a disability. And I would go about and, maybe enable talkback on your Android phone, or the iPhone probably has some other kind of accessibility services, and try and navigate any app. Or if you're an app developer or a website developer or so on, try and navigate and see where you get, see how difficult it is. And the one thing that I have a lot of empathy for is, as tech companies, we often change things around so quickly, but it makes it so much more difficult for folks that have disabilities when we change things around just because we want to. They have to relearn apps from scratch, and it's not as easy for us. It's easy for us to learn, but it's not easy for disabled folks to learn because they have to work that much harder. Then there's a couple of resources that you can look at on my website. But one resource that I really liked for Android is a tutorial by Victoria Gonda. She wrote basically a tutorial on designing and testing and implementing all these things for Android. And I thought that was probably the most comprehensive one that I've seen.
Could you spell the name? Tutorial by who?
Victoria Gonda, Gonda.
Got it. Just wanted to post that so that people can see. Nice. So we've got another question from Veliswa Boya. She says, your dad was also a developer. That's cool. What languages did he code in?
He's coded in so many languages. It's crazy. He recently did an Android app, which was new and exciting for me because I had to explain a lot of things. He's coded a lot in Java, a lot in Visual Basic. He's coded in Ada. He's coded in so many old languages. So just all over the place. Recently, he did a project on controlling drones with Android phones. So he's done some amazing work. It's really very impressive. He's just supposed to be retired, but he's not retired.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so what would you give as a tip to rewriting an already existing app to make it more accessible?
So I would actually go ahead and either use your Play Store, your Play Console report, and just have a look and see what's on that console, what is it identifying, and start with fixing those. I've actually many times wanted to do just a small little hackathon with a core team of designers, or like a designer, a UX writer, and a developer, just to fix a few things. I think it can go really, really far because you need the designer to help you with making sure that your design is cohesive, and you need the UX writer for making sure that your copy is not mangled and confusing, and that it's clear and readable and understandable and goes with the brand tone, and obviously the developer to type the codes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So do you think that there are similarities to creating accessibility for web, the same as on Android?
Yes. So there's actually a standard called, I think it's a web a W3C web accessibility guide, and that is actually the standard for accessibility, not what I not what I've taught you on Android, we kind of are still in the process of trying to figure out how to make Android apps accessible. There's no standard. So a lot of the key guidelines that we have on Android actually come from the web.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very cool talk by Obina Ikwanu who's from Nigeria, and he recently did a talk at DevFest South Africa on accessibility for the web. And I would really check him out. Follow him on Twitter, Obina Codes, or Obina Speaks, I think. And amazing knowledge about accessibility on the web.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pamela. I think that's all we have time for right now. Just scanning through to see if we have any last questions. Okay, yeah. So that's it. Thank you so much to everybody that joined, and big thanks to you, Pamela, for sharing your knowledge and your journey with us today. This was really an awesome session.
Thank you. It was so much fun. Thank you for everyone that came.
Thank you. And so if people would like to connect with you, Pamela, how can they reach out to you?
Twitter is always a good place. My Twitter handle is @PamelaA.Hill.
Okay, great. So that's @PamelaA.Hill. Thanks, everybody. If you'd like to learn more about Women Techmakers, please check out our website, womentechmakers.com, or follow us on any social media that we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. You should also subscribe to this page, as we have a lot of other videos that we've done in the past, and we have some upcoming sessions in November and December as well. So please check those out. Thank you so much, and bye.